At 2:14 in the morning, something impossible happens. The digital world over the English Channel, one of the busiest and most monitored stretches of water on planet Earth, simply stops existing. No warning, no countdown, just silence on the bridge of a 150,000-ton LNG carrier. A captain watches his GPS display flicker once it resets, and then it tells him something that makes his stomach drop. He is sitting in the middle of a French wheat field 3 miles inland. His ship hasn't moved, but according to every electronic system on board, he is nowhere near the ocean. Then the alarm starts screaming. The automatic identification system, the system that tracks every vessel in the area, suddenly shows 500 ships appearing out of thin air, 500 phantom contacts, all moving at 460 miles per hour. Ships don't move at 460 miles per hour. These aren't ships. This is an attack, not with missiles, not with bullets, but with data. Someone is rewriting reality itself. And then every screen on the bridge goes completely black. Out of that digital fog, a silhouette appears, moving fast, moving dark. No lights, no transponder signal, nothing on civilian radar. This is the Yaroslav Mudry, a Nostrashamy-class Russian frigate, cutting through the English Channel at 35 miles per hour. Its electronic warfare systems consuming the entire frequency spectrum around it like a predator, swallowing its prey whole. The Strait of Dover is only 21 miles wide. That's not a lot of room, and right now in the darkness it has become a minefield. But here's what the Russians didn't account for. They aren't the only hunters in this water tonight. Somewhere in the electronic clutter, somewhere in that fog of jammed signals, ghost contacts, and dead GPS, 2 NATO warships are already moving. HMS Iron Duke, a Type 23 frigate, Royal Navy, 5,000 tons of British steel, and decades of institutional knowledge about fighting in exactly these kinds of waters. And beside her, USS Arleigh Burke, an American guided missile destroyer, one of the most capable surface combatants ever built. A ship that practically defines what modern naval warfare looks like. The U.S. Navy is not here as a backup. The USS Arleigh Burke is providing the electronic backbone of the entire response, punching through Russian jamming with millions of watts of electromagnetic energy, fighting fire with fire in the invisible war happening above the waves, while the physical confrontation is about to erupt below. The Yaroslav Mudry makes its first aggressive move. It lunges forward, cutting directly across the bow of a 300,000-ton crude oil tanker, a ship so massive that if it were stood on its end it would be taller than the Eiffel Tower. The Russian frigate misses the tanker's bulbous bow by less than 40 yards. 40 yards on a ship that size. That is nothing. That is a margin of error that would send shivers down the spine of any mariner alive. But this isn't recklessness, this is calculation. The Yaroslav Mudry is using the physical bulk of civilian vessels to mask its own radar signature from shore-based defense systems. It's hiding behind the innocent, using commercial ships as a shield. That's when HMS Iron Duke responds. Its spay gas turbine screams to life. 5,000 tons of warship accelerates to 34 miles per hour. In seconds, a violent shuddering surge of power that pushes the crew hard against their stations. Alongside her, the USS Arleigh Burke matches the move, cutting through the chop with the kind of aggressive confidence that only comes from knowing exactly what your ship can do. The 2 NATO warships close the distance until they are less than 60 yards from the Russian hull. 60 yards. Let that land for a moment. These are 5,000-ton warships moving at speed in the dark in one of the world's busiest shipping lanes, and they are now close enough that the crews can see each other's faces. This is not a naval engagement from a distance. This is a knife fight, and the blades weigh thousands of tons. On the deck of the Yaroslav Mudry, the AK-630 Gatling gun mount begins to track. Its barrel swivels slowly, deliberately, locking onto the bridge of the USS Arleigh Burke. This is a weapon that fires 5,000 rounds per minute. At this range, it wouldn't just damage the American warship, it would tear through it. The Americans don't wait to find out if the Russians are bluffing. The Mark 45 5-inch gun on the bow of the USS Arleigh Burke fires once a 70-pound high-explosive shell screams across the water and hits the waves exactly 500 yards in front of the Yaroslav Mudry's bow. The message is clear, delivered in the universal language of naval warfare. The next one won't be a warning. Simultaneously, HMS Iron Duke deploys something different, something that doesn't explode, doesn't burn, and doesn't leave a hole in anyone's hull, but is absolutely devastating. A long-range acoustic device, a directed sound weapon, 150 decibels of focused wall of sound energy aimed directly at the Russian bridge. The effect is immediate and brutal. Bridge windows shatter. Unprotected crew members on the Russian bridge are incapacitated, disoriented, unable to function, overwhelmed by a force they cannot see, and cannot fight back against. The Yaroslav Mudry swerves violently. Its steel hull scrapes against the wave guard of HMS Iron Duke with a sound like tortured metal, screaming, a long grinding shriek that echoes across the water and tells everyone within earshot that this confrontation has just become very, very real. This is the moment that separates military technology from military capability. Every piece of equipment we have described, the electronic warfare systems, the acoustic weapons, the fire control radars, none of it works without the people behind it, the sailors, who train for years to operate these systems under exactly this kind of pressure in the dark, under threat, with no margin for error. If you've stood a watch on an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer or a Type 23 frigate, you know what it means when the machines start failing and the training takes over, when the GPS is gone and the radar is jammed, and the only thing standing between a diplomatic incident and a shooting war is the judgment of a junior officer on a darkened bridge. If you've been there, share your story, because our fleet isn't made of steel, it's made of the people who know how to fight. When the lights go out, while the frigates were grinding against each other on the surface, while the world's attention was being pulled toward the noise and fire of that confrontation, something else was happening beneath the waves, and this was the real mission. All along, the Russian tanker Yelnya had quietly deviated from its shipping lane, not aggressively, not dramatically, just a slow, subtle course change that would be nearly invisible in the chaos of jammed AIS signals and phantom radar contacts. The Yelnya was moving toward a very specific set of coordinates, a location on the seabed of the English Channel that most people don't think about, and almost nobody talks about: the Atlantic backbone fiber optic cables buried on the ocean floor, carrying over $10 trillion worth of financial transactions every single day, the invisible nervous system of the global economy. Data flowing at the speed of light, banking transactions, stock trades, government communications, military data, links, all of it running through a handful of cables sitting on the seabed beneath one of the world's most trafficked shipping lanes. The Yelnya slowed to a crawl and positioned itself directly over the coordinates. Then a hidden hatch in its belly, a moon pool, a submerged opening in the hull slid open. Something was being released into the water below, 5,000 feet above a U.S. Navy P-8A Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft was already there, orbiting, watching, listening. The P-8A Poseidon is not a glamorous aircraft. It doesn't feature in action movies. It doesn't look particularly threatening from the outside, but it is, without question, one of the most capable surveillance and anti-submarine platforms ever built, and its crew had been watching the Yelnya course deviation before anyone else noticed it. The Poseidon drops a high-altitude anti-submarine warfare sonobuoy pattern 32 acoustic sensors hitting the water in a perfect grid around the Yelnya, each one listening for sounds that don't belong. Within seconds, they find what they're looking for: the acoustic signature of electric motors, small, quiet, efficient, but unmistakably mechanical. An underwater drone descending through the dark water toward the seabed, toward the cables. The drone is latching on the USS Arleigh Burke, receives the data through the Poseidon's link instantly, and begins deploying its SQ-89V-15 sonar suite, extending acoustic arrays into the water to track and engage the underwater threat. The Yaroslav Mudry sees what is happening, and it responds with lethal precision. It executes a stern crossing, a high-speed maneuver that places its propellers directly over the path of the American sonar cables. The goal is simple and merciless: shred the cables blind. The Americans underwater, and by the drone enough time to complete its work. The USS Arleigh Burke has to throw its engines into emergency reverse. The vibration is so violent, so intense, that it rattles through the entire hull, through the bulkheads, through the deck, plating through the bodies of every sailor on board. One moment you're chasing a Russian warship, the next your own ship feels like it's coming apart at the joints. The American counter is immediate. Mark 59 launchers fire a salvo of acoustic decoys into the water. Each one hits the surface and begins broadcasting, emitting the precise acoustic signature of a nuclear submarine's reactor. Within seconds, the Russian sonar operators are overwhelmed. Their screens are flooded with contacts that aren't their phantom submarines, appearing in every direction. Their tracking systems pulled away from the real threat. The Russians are chasing ghosts, and while they're chasing ghosts, the USS Arleigh Burke maneuvers into a blocking position between the Yelnya and open water, pressing the tanker against the British coastline with nowhere to run. HMS Iron Duke launches its Wildcat II helicopter. The USS Arleigh Burke puts its MH-60, our Seahawk, into the air. The two helicopters descend over the Yelnya, hovering 60 feet above the tanker's deck. Their dipping sonars lowered directly into the moon pool. They can hear the drone below. They can track it. They are 60 feet away from shutting the entire operation down. The Yaroslav Mudry is not going to let that happen. Its MR-352 positive fire control radar activates and achieves a hard lock on the American MH-60, our Seahawk. In the cockpit of that helicopter, the radar warning receiver shifts from a chirp to a continuous soul-piercing scream. Every pilot knows that sound. It means a missile is seconds away from leaving its rail. The USS Arleigh Burke's Aegis combat system transitions to auto special mode without hesitation. The Mark 41 vertical launch system silos on the deck click open mechanical interlocks. Disengaging the ship is ready to fire an SM-2 interceptor, a missile that can intercept a target moving at 2,500 miles per hour at this range. It would reach the Yaroslav Mudry in under 15 seconds. For one terrible moment, everyone holds their breath. Then the Russian frigate makes a different decision. It points its reinforced ice-capable bow directly at the midsection of the USS Arleigh Burke and pushes its engines to emergency flank speed, a suicide burn, not a missile strike, a ramming attempt at 400 yards. Then 200 the AK-630 mounts on the Russian deck are manned and ready, waiting for the moment of impact to shred the American superstructure. At the last possible second, HMS Iron Duke fires its high-intensity dazzler laser. A blinding green beam hits the Russian bridge and saturates their optics entirely. The Russian helmsman, suddenly unable to see, cannot maintain course. Simultaneously, the USS Arleigh Burke fires its bow thrusters, massive underwater jets that physically shove the front of the ship sideways. In a split-second emergency maneuver, the Yaroslav Mudry misses the American hull by less than 15 feet. The energy from that near miss creates a standing wave that crashes over the deck of the USS Arleigh Burke, drenching the sailors at the 25mm chain gun mounts, soaking wet in the dark, in the middle of a combat engagement, still at their stations. From the deck of the Yelnya II Project 03160 Raptor-class patrol boats hit the water, high-speed interceptors, 55 miles per hour, armed with 14 5mm heavy machine guns designed for naval special operations. Their mission: forced the NATO helicopters away from the moon pool. The USS Arleigh Burke launches its rigid-hull inflatable boat HMS Iron Duke, sends its Pacific 24 with Royal Navy boarding technicians. Both NATO boats hit the water at 45 miles per hour. The channel, usually the domain of slow-moving commercial giants, becomes a racetrack. The Russian Raptors open fire. 14 5mm tracer rounds rip across the water, skipping off the waves like burning stones. One-round punches through the inflatable collar of the American RHIB, but the multi-chamber design holds it, doesn't sink. The American sailors return fire, putting controlled bursts into the Russian outboard engines, chewing apart the cowlings, disabling rather than destroying, because this is still a gray zone engagement, and every decision has diplomatic consequences. And then the Wildcat HMA-2 delivers the finishing blow. It drops a slug of 500-pound non-explosive acoustic weight directly into the moon pool of the Yelnya, guided by a laser designator from the USS Arleigh Burke. The slug sinks 60 feet and hits the underwater drone with enough force to snap its robotic arms, crush its pressure hull, and shred the induction sleeve, the brain of the entire cable-tapping operation, into glass and copper. The mission is over. The cable is intact. The Russians know it. The Yaroslav Mudry fires one final burst, its AK-630 Gatlings, hammering the water in a 360-degree arc, turning the surface of the English Channel into a chaos of foam and lead. Not to hit anything to cover the retreat, the USS Arleigh Burke moves into the kill zone. Anyway, its phalanx CIWS firing airburst rounds that detonate above the Russian sensor arrays, shattering radar dishes, and buying the NATO helicopters time to recover. The Yaroslav Mudry and Yelnya run 110% engine capacity, black smoke pouring from their funnels as they push south toward the Atlantic, and then the Mediterranean. NATO pursues them to the edge of territorial waters 20 miles. Out in open ocean, the Yaroslav Mudry turns one final time, its hull scarred, its sensors degraded, its bridge battered. It locks its missiles onto the USS Arleigh Burke. The USS Arleigh Burke locks its SM-6 missiles onto the Russian frigate. For 10 minutes, neither ship moves. 2 crews, 2 flags, 2 trigger fingers, 1 miscalculation, 1 sensor glitch, 1 bird flying through a radar beam at the wrong moment, and both ships go to the bottom. Then the Russians blink. The Yaroslav Mudry turns south. The Yelnya follows slower, its moon pool doors bent and leaking oil, leaving a trail of debris behind it, and a destroyed drone on the seabed of the English Channel. As the sun rises, GPS signals on merchant ships all across the channel snap back to reality. The world wakes up and goes about its business. Stock markets open, financial transactions flow through the cables on the seabed. Nobody on shore knows what happened in the dark, but the sailors know the Russians weren't trying to start a war. They were testing a question: do the Americans and the British still have the will to fight? They got their answer in 20mm shells, 150 decibel sound walls, and 2 warship crews that held the line without flinching. Before we close, there is one detail about missile systems that almost never gets discussed, but matters enormously in a confined space. Like the English Channel, the SM-2 on the USS Arleigh Burke uses a hot launch system. The rocket ignites inside the Mark 41 silo, a controlled explosion vented through the deck. It is powerful and proven, but it creates a massive infrared signature that temporarily blinds the ship's own sensors. In a crowded shipping lane, those lost seconds could mean missing a second incoming threat entirely. The Scepter missile on HMS Iron Duke works differently. Cold launch. A high-pressure piston ejects the missile 100 feet into the air before the engine even starts. No fire bloom, no sense of blackout. The British ship can fire a missile and maintain a perfect radar picture of the battlespace at the exact same moment. Two nations, two philosophies of defense, and together, no blind spots. Remember that the next time you see what looks like a routine patrol, every piece of gear on that deck was designed for a fight that hasn't happened yet.